당은 가서 아주 코발에 계획이 당 레다 기위가 포위 동안 요약이 유동안이.
Good morning. So last night we continued to look at the origins of our suffering. Because previous to this we looked at in some detail on the various ways that one comes to see just how pervasive suffering is. So previously we had looked at the presentations of the threefold, eightfold and sixfold presentations on suffering. And now we come to look at the origin, the causes of suffering. And there we've seen it's twofold, afflictions and karma. And of these two, it was shown that the afflictions are primary. Hence, Lama Tsongkhapa then first gives a presentation on the afflictions. The afflictions can be presented in different ways. Often it has 6 root and 20 secondary afflictions. But in this text, Lama Tsongkhapa just presented the 6 root afflictions, but presented them in an expanded presentation of 10. So these we looked at on page 168, the actual identification of the afflictions. We saw them presented as attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, the view of the transitory collection, the view of holding to an extreme, the view of holding a bad view to be best, and the view of holding ethics and religious conduct to be best, and lastly, wrong views. So that we looked at last time. Last night, we came to look at the final section here, which is to clearly present the faults of the afflictions. So this is imperative because we've heard that the afflictions are the source of our suffering, but this needs to arise to us with vivid clarity in a way that leads us to recognize that the afflictions are our sole enemy and that at all times we must be on guard against these afflictions. And we saw this first presented, the faults of the afflictions, presented through a quotation from Maitreya's Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, in which it presents that through the mere arisal of the afflictions, we suffer. And we suffer now, and through the accumulation of non-virtuous karma, we will suffer later in this life and in lives to come, perhaps even falling into the lower realms. Moreover, through the expression of the afflictions in our own continuum, we bring suffering into the lives of others. And the faults of afflictions then were further expanded on from verses quoted from Shantideva's Entering the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And we concluded by the summation, the conclusion, that seeing how the afflictions are our true enemy, we need to abandon them. And to abandon them, we need to train in the various antidotes, cultivate the various antidotes, mostly the temporary antidotes, which subdue our afflictions. And especially we need to train in the antidote that destroys the root cause of all our afflictions, the ignorance of self-grasping. Because it's from this ignorance of self-grasping that all the other afflictions arise. So therefore, the primary antidote is the wisdom realizing selflessness. So returning to the text in the middle, page 171, now come to the final sub-outline, which is relating the development of antidotes to the words of former masters. So it's a quotation from Gunpawa. To eliminate the mental afflictions, you must know their faults, their definitions, their antidotes, and the causes for their arising. Once you have understood their faults, you should see them as faults and apprehend them as enemies. If you do not understand their faults, you will not understand them to be enemies. So Gunpawa starts by saying, to eliminate the afflictions, you must know their faults. And the reason this is stated explicitly as the first point, yes, because several points are listed, but this is presented as the first point to make it very clear to his audience that the purpose of hearing Dharma teachings isn't to merely gather information, but it is the purpose of hearing Dharma is to transform our very way of thinking based on that information. So in order to be able to abandon the afflictions, the source of all our suffering, and gain liberation from the afflictions and suffering itself, one must see them as faults. must know the faults of the afflictions, without truly recognize them or clearly recognizing the afflictions as being harmful. One's motivation and self-discipline to eradicate them will not arise. In order to eliminate the afflictions, one must know their faults. Moreover, the second point, their definitions. So their definitions or their entity is one needs to understand what these afflictions are. For example, if one takes anger, one needs to understand what is meant by this term anger and what its function is, what the affliction leads to. Same too with attachment. One needs to understand what this term attachment and just how pervasive and easy it is to arise, and what its function is. So too with pride and other afflictions, what is meant by this term and what the function of the particular affliction is. So I'm just going to change the last word in the first line here. To eliminate the mental afflictions, you must know them as dangerous. You must know, so that's the first point. You must know them as dangerous. So it's not merely, this is just to emphasize that not merely to see them as faulty, but to recognize the danger that they pose. Secondly, one needs to know their definitions, in other words, what is meant by the afflictions, by each affliction. And then thirdly, one needs to know their antidotes. Because once one has come to recognize something as harmful, as dangerous, one will want to avoid it. And when we recognize it abides within, one will want to abandon it. So for example, anger, this affliction is easy to recognize as being harmful and to understand what it is. Then one will want to live a life free of anger, not to be an angry person, not to even experience frustration or annoyance. So therefore one will want to hear about the antidotes and then train in it, so cultivate patience. And each of the various afflictions have respective antidotes, and all of them have coming from one root cause of the ignorance of self-grasping. One comes to recognize that the various antidotes, whilst one needs to cultivate them so as to have the mind less afflicted, those antidotes are temporary in that they do not on their own, antidotes such as patience do not on their own lead to the complete eradication of the afflictions. One needs to cultivate an ultimate antidote, the ultimate antidote, which is the wisdom realizing selflessness. This is the antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping, the root affliction from which all the other afflictions arise. And then lastly, the causes for their arising, the causes for the arisal of their afflictions. Because wanting to now having come to understand the faults or the danger that the afflictions present, one wants to apply antidotes to them. So one needs to understand the sequence that leads to their arisal so that one can apply the antidote prior to the arisal of the affliction. So the first sentence explains a sequence of training, that in order to eliminate the mental afflictions, you must see them as dangerous. You must understand what is meant by them, know their antidotes, and the causes for their arising, the sequence in which they arise. So then, once you have understood their faults, you should see them as faulty and apprehend them as enemies. So again, we can here use the word danger. So once you have understood the danger of the afflictions, you should see them as dangerous and apprehend them as enemies. So this sentence is emphasizing that having gathered knowledge, remember the purpose of this knowledge you have gathered, which is to apply it. To apply it both in formal settings, such as when one's in meditation, but also in informal settings throughout one's day. By recognizing the afflictions as dangerous, as attachment as dangerous, anger as dangerous, and so forth, one needs that firm commitment to not let them deceive you, thinking that they are a protector, that they are a source of happiness. One needs to see them as the dangerous enemies that they are. The next sentence, if you do not understand their faults, you will not understand them to be enemies. Again, if you do not understand them as dangerous, you will not understand them to be enemies. So this is a key point being made here in this topic of the faults of the mental afflictions, that one needs to not merely understand them as harmful, but to recognize them as presenting danger. Danger to yourself, and through their expression, danger to others. And to drive this point home, one needs to reflect on what is being presented above. The next sentence, therefore, you should contemplate them along the lines of the statements from Ornament for the Mahayana Sutras and Entering the Bodhisattva Way. So these verses that we looked at last night, where it was clearly presented that the afflictions only cause harm. They will lead us to suffer in the moment of their arisal, throughout this life, and lives to come. And this is the role they've been playing in our lives since beginningless time. And through their expression, our relationship with others are harmed or even destroyed, and conflict replaces harmony. So in this way, we come to recognize the danger the afflictions pose. Gunpoa continues in the next quotation. In order to know the definitions of mental afflictions, you should also study the Abhidhamma, at least the explanation of the 5 aggregates. This is just referencing a text there, whereas at a minimum, one can at least come to understand what is meant by the afflictions. Because as we saw in his quotation above, we need to, in order to eliminate the afflictions, we must see them as dangers through coming to understand their definitions, their antidotes, and the causes for their arising. Hence, one needs to study broadly. So Gunpoa is encouraging us to hear, so to study, and reflect on what you are studying. Ideally, one should have a broad and detailed education, but as it says here, at the very least, one should study this particular chapter from the Abhidhamma. The quotation then continues. Once you become acquainted with the root and secondary afflictions, so this I referenced earlier this morning as well as last night, that the root afflictions are 6 and the secondary afflictions are 20. So this is how it's often presented, such as in the Abhidhamma. But we have the 6 root afflictions presented in the expanded version of 10. So one can come in these various ways to understand the afflictions. Thereby, one will, continuing with the quote, you'll be able to identify the afflictions such as attachment, anger, and so forth. Now it comes to the real purpose of gathering this knowledge, and that gathering this knowledge and reflecting on it, so hearing and reflecting, which is, and whatever it is, as soon as they arise in your mind stream, thinking, that is that. In other words, identifying that an affliction is arising, oh no, it has arisen, and you will then fight the mental afflictions. So this is a key point that is being made here at the end of this section, that the purpose of gathering this knowledge and reflecting on it, is coming to recognize what the afflictions are and the great danger that they pose, is so that one, through relying on mindfulness and vigilance at all times, is primarily concerned with one's inner response to what one is encountering. And when one, through recognizing the causes for the arisal of the afflictions, knows, in particular when one knows one is in a situation where they may well arise, one is on guard with vigilance. And as soon as vigilance notices an affliction arising, mindfulness recalls its grave danger and its antidote. Then through the force of one's study and reflection, one applies that antidote. And in this, and one does so, as it says here, and you'll fight the mental afflictions. So you can think of a soldier knowing that they are in grave danger, and as soon as that danger presents itself, they respond, they protect themselves, they defend themselves, and they deal with the enemy at hand. So too, through relying on mindfulness and vigilance, as soon as that affliction is noted, then one recalls the faults of the affliction, the danger it poses, and applies the antidote. So again, freedom from the sufferings of samsara, or liberation from the suffering realms of samsara, one needs to guard one's mind from the cause of our suffering, the very creator of this prison we are trapped in. In other words, at all times, be on guard against the arisal of the afflictions. By saying at all times, I emphasize, certainly when we are in formal practice situations, but also throughout our day, whether we are with others or alone. We need to rely on mindfulness and vigilance. At all times, using vigilance to watch our mind. And in particular, if we prepared ourselves, knowing what situations we are likely to find ourselves in the day ahead, knowing where we are in danger of the afflictions arising, particularly at those times, but really at all times, through vigilance or introspection, we guard our mind through watching it, seeing how we respond to all that we encounter. And as soon as vigilance notices an affliction arising, immediately, in dependence on one's training, mindfulness kicks into action, reminding you this affliction is not a friend. It is not there to protect you. It is not there as a source of happiness. This is a deceptive presentation. The afflictions only present danger. And through this mindfulness, this a process of recollection of mindfulness, then the antidote is recalled and applied. This is the training that we need to engage in. This is the primary training of guarding our mind to prevent us from accumulating further causes that will keep us bound in the suffering realms of samsara, and thereby keeping our mind virtuous, accumulating the causes that will lead to our liberation. So by training in this way, relying on mindfulness and vigilance at all times, we will greatly reduce the non-virtue we accumulate, especially the powerful non-virtue that can lead to rebirth in the lower realms. Moreover, by relying on mindfulness and vigilance at all time, because we are doing so because we recognize the grave danger that the afflictions present, this will also aid the purification of our previously accumulated non-virtue, in that the opponent powers of regret and restraint will be very powerful, again, because we recognize the grave danger that the afflictions present. So this then is the method by which one guards one's mind from accumulating further causes of suffering and rather accumulates causes for happiness and leads to purification of past accumulated non-virtue. Last week when we were looking through the presentation, the tenfold presentation on the afflictions, we spoke about the first, that of attachment. Spoke about how it arises so easily, because we are, after all, in the desire realm, or to translate that differently, the realm of attachment. Hence, this affliction arises so easily. It's almost pervasive within us. And moreover, as we saw in the text last time, that when it arises, it seems to mix with the object in a way that's similar to oil in cloth, making it difficult to remove. To recognize how frequently attachment arises and how easily, with very little stimulation, it arises, takes tremendous training of the mind, developing vigilance and mindfulness at all times, recognizing how this drawing towards something comes about so easily. In this process of training the mind, one needs to be very clear on the faults of all the afflictions, here specifically talking about attachment. This affliction that appears to us as a means by which we attain happiness. But that happiness, as we've seen previously, is the transient happiness of suffering. So we need to come to recognize, through reflecting on all the afflictions, attachment in particular, that it presents only danger. It is never our friend. And thereby develop a deep determination to guard our mind against the arisal of the afflictions, and if they have arisen, to restrain ourselves from following or acting under their influence. It's important we look at how the afflictions arise, to come to recognize just how easily they do arise. To take an example, if someone asks you a question, there's a feeling of happiness that arises, that you have been recognized as someone who is an authority on whatever is being asked, and therefore this person is acting, showing respect to your knowledge. So there's a happy feeling inside. But if you ask the same question several times, that happy feeling is not going to keep arising. You are much more likely to get annoyed. So the mind, from initially being quite pleased at being asked, that being pleased lessens, and then the mind becomes unhappy. So we saw this earlier and it wasn't in these teachings. So when the mind of mental unhappiness arises, then that is the immediately preceding condition for anger to arise. And if one is not trained in patience, then being asked the same question again and again, one is going to get annoyed. Whereas if one has trained in patience, one will be very aware of this process and will guard one's mind effectively. If one has been watching one's mind, training one's mind, one will recognize this is a situation of danger. Perhaps the same person's asking the same question, or I'm keeping asked the same question. This is a situation where my mind may get annoyed. I need to be on guard. Or one may notice the mind getting slightly annoyed and immediately apply an antidote. That illustration was from the perspective of being asked a question. Another illustration, but from the perspective of hearing teachings. When one hears something new and it's something that feels relevant, then one's quite interested, quite stimulated. This is something positive. But then you hear it presented again, and then again, and then again, and one gets a little, I know this. Why am I being told this again? And then the mind is now already on the side of unhappiness, which means annoyance is likely to follow. One gets annoyed thinking, this is boring. I've been told this again and again. I'm being condescended towards. I'm too advanced for this. Any kind of reaction on the negative side can follow. And in the end, one can walk away in a huff, fed up with this. So this is a sign of a mind that is not trained. A mind that is trained will recognize that I'm hearing this again, be aware, this has triggered me in the past, let me take care of my mind. And rather rejoice in being told something I know already, so it's being reinforced within me. And thereby, looking at the same situation skillfully, through different eyes, one will experience it differently. So this is how, through training one's mind, what one experiences it in a different way. To give a further illustration, let's say someone who's in need of assistance asks you for help. Perhaps you respond by feeling really good at being the one asked to help. Maybe you feel a little special. And then you help them, and you help them with a good motivation. But you finished, and they just go away. They don't thank you. They don't even show a facial expression of gratitude. Then one is likely to be a bit annoyed. And if they later help you, or ask you for help, you may well agree, but not with that same joy and enthusiasm as before. And if, once again, they don't show any gratitude, you may get a bit fed up, feeling taken advantage of, and think, I'm not going to help them again. If they've got that kind of attitude, they can sort it out themselves. So here what we see is the person is not trained in watching their mind. They probably do not understand the afflictions, because they did not recognize the arisal of the attachment that came from being asked for help, and the attachment to praise and not being fulfilled when they were not thanked. And thereby, they didn't even notice the mind moving from happily helping to one of mental unhappiness, and thereby annoyance arising. So this person had no opportunity to apply any antidote because they're not aware of their inner working, and they just responded habitually, not being shown, not the person being helped, not acting in accordance with social norms, led to what is considered an acceptable response, feeling taken advantage of and not wanting to help again. A skilled practitioner, though, by relying on mindfulness and vigilance, understanding the workings of the mind, will have recognized the arisal of attachment and be aware that when attachment is unfulfilled, anger follows. And then when there were not thanks, they would recognize, the flavor of my mind has changed. Let me be sure not to take this personally, to recognize this person meant nothing by their failure to thank me. It's not a big deal. This isn't why I was helping them. And then the mind stays calm through the application of patience. So this is how someone who is trained in mindfulness and vigilance, watching their mind at all times, will respond to the same situation in a remarkably different way, a far more skillful way. When one is looking within, coming to observe the workings of our mind, seeing how we respond, we'll come to recognize how easily the afflictions arise. And we'll also come to recognize that it's quite difficult to generate the afflictions, to even be aware to generate them and then to recall them, and certainly to generate them in a way that subdues our mind once the affliction has arisen. Recognizing this is important, but we need to understand what the workings of our mind, so that we are not despondent, thinking it's too difficult for us. Because if you take other circumstance, someone asks you, would you like to go to this restaurant and eat this kind of food? Immediately you have an opinion, because you know that kind of food, and you know if you enjoy it or not. Or if they say it's a lovely day, should we go here and do this or do that? Again, because you are familiar with that activity, you immediately have an opinion. You can say, yes, I'd like to, or no, I don't generally enjoy that kind of thing. The reason one can respond so easily, so readily, is because of your habituation. So where one is deeply habituated to something, one easily responds. Where one's habituation is weak, it requires intentional effort to bring it about, because the causes behind that habituation are so much weaker. And where habituation is completely lacking, one just will not respond in that way. So this needs to be understood very clearly, because then when we see that, for example, we are habituated to the afflictions, this is why they arise so easily. There's something that we like or dislike, we encounter it, naturally that affliction will arise. We'll be drawn towards it, or we'll be repulsed from it. This naturally arises solely due to habituation. When one recognizes this point of habituation, then that frees one up from any self-doubt, knowing all I need to do is strengthen habituation to the desired way of thinking and break habituation to undesired way of thinking. This is all. Because likewise, if we think of in our own personality or what we observe in others, we see that we are there's certain virtuous minds that naturally arise for us, or we can see this in others' personality too, that they are naturally virtuous in a particular way. This is how they respond. And that too is nothing more than a habituation. So whether it's to afflicted ways of thinking or virtuous ways of thinking, this is just an expression of, or how easily it arises, is just an expression of the strength of the habituation. So where one sees that one generally responds in an afflicted way, by training one's mind to see that same situation differently, then one will start initially intentionally, but later spontaneously to respond to that same situation in a very different way. So if there's someone who annoys you, right now every time you see them or hear them, one gets a bit annoyed. By training one's mind in the ways taught, one will come to recognize them eventually as an old friend. One will first perhaps come to recognize them as an opportunity to express one's training, to develop and express one's training, and eventually come to recognize them as an old friend. So this can come about through training our mind repeatedly over a sustained period. Hence this presentation here, that we need to rely on mindfulness and vigilance at all times, independent on the prior understanding of the grave dangers that the afflictions pose, what the afflictions are, and what the antidotes are, and how they arise. And thereby, by relying on mindfulness and vigilance at all times, we can recognize their arisal, recognize when we are in a situation where they're more likely to arise, and apply the antidotes skillfully. And where one will experience the change from the situation is that you'll see the minds of the Dharma. First, you're at least becoming aware this is an opportunity to apply an antidote or to apply a virtuous mind. And then by doing this repeatedly, this will become a habit of yours. In other words, it will start to become part of who you are. So when encountering, for example, a person who is suffering, compassion naturally arises. Encountering a person who's suffering in a way that previously we became fearful of, perhaps exploding in anger, compassion will naturally arise. Fear will not come. Anger will not come. Compassion will come. Likewise, in other circumstances, refuge arises. The mind of definite emergence arises, and so forth. So this is where one sees the Dharma arising within you. And why is it? Because of one's habituation that one has developed by training in the ways described repeatedly over a sustained period, not just in formal situations, but at all times. So this then, maybe I'll just talk about the book. So now we've been looking at true origins, and the origins of suffering are twofold: afflictions, which are primary, and karma. So we've looked at the afflictions, and now we come to the presentation on karma. So turning over the page to the new chapter, chapter 13, on page 173. So here we've spoken about afflictions as being the primary cause of us being bound in samsara. Now we come to look at karma. So this is, we see here how karma is thereby accumulated. So this is the second point from page chapter 12 on page 167. We had 3 points. The first was relating to the afflictions, and now the second to karma. And over the page will be the third point, how you die and are reborn. So here we come to look at how karma is accumulated, what is meant by karma. Now we come to identifying the karma that is accumulated. So this has two parts. Karma that is intended, and karma that is intention, and karma that is intention, and karma that is intentional action. Just to say again as the translator, remember karma and action is the same word, so both will be used. When talking about karma, we talk about karma that is accumulated by means of body or physical action, speech or verbal action, and mental action. So, in other words, karma is accumulated by 3 means: body, speech, and mind. This can be further divided or presented. A karma accumulated by means of the body, speech, and mind can be presented as that the karma accumulated by the mind is karma that is intention, and karma accumulated by body and speech is karma that is intentional action. So just this term, karma that is intentional action, or you could, because karma and action is the same word, and it's only once in the Tibetan. But just for clarity, karma that is intentional action, or through the body and speech, then one engages in intentional karma. So here we're seeing karma divided into 2, karma that is intention and karma that is intentional action. How we most commonly hear karma divided is into the means by which it is accumulated. Karma accumulated by means of physical behavior, verbal behavior, mental activity. But this is a different way that karma can be divided, instead of into 3, into 2. That karma that is intention, mental karma, karma that is intentional action, so physical and verbal. Another way that karma can be divided is into the 3 of virtuous karma, non-virtuous karma, and immovable karma. And a further division of karma into 2 is into contaminated and uncontaminated karma. So that's then mentioning various ways that karma is presented, is divided and presented in these different ways. But what is presented here in identifying the karma that is accumulated is primarily or firstly into the two, karma that is intention and karma that is intentional action. So then, looking at the first, karma that is intention, this is the first sentence. Mental karma is the karma that is intention. The mental factor that makes its concomitant mind move and urges it towards objects. Then of these, with karma presented as two, karma that is intention and karma that is intentional action. This first sentence deals with karma that is intention. So this needs to be understood in a specific context of how the mind can be presented. The mind can be presented or divided in different ways. So one way that it is presented is in main minds and mental factors. So this is what is being referenced here. So you see there the term mental factor. So here, when the mind is presented in this way, you have a mind or main mind, as well as then a wide variety of mental factors. So all of them are consciousness, but it is a different way to present or explain the workings of consciousness. So main mind is mental consciousness, and then it is accompanied by a number of mental factors. So in this context, if someone says, is mind karma? The answer is no. Because mind, in this presentation, mind is synonymous with main mind, and this here is a mental consciousness, and mental consciousness in this presentation is not karma. Karma is one of the mental factors. So, reading the sentence, mental karma is a karma that is intention. Intention is one of the 5 object ascertaining mental factors. So, what is mental karma? It is intention. It is not a main mind. It is intention. And it is the mental factor, and here it comes to its function. The function of intention, what it does, it makes its concomitant mind, its main mind, and urges it towards the object. So the intention moves the mind towards its object. So this is the function of this particular object ascertaining mental factor. And that is mental karma. So intention is mental karma. So the function of this mental factor intention is it directs the mind and its concomitant mental factors towards a particular object. So it's like, for example, for a car to go in a particular direction, its wheels need to be directed in that direction, and then it will travel in that way. So this is the function of this mental factor intention. If intention is drawn to a particular object, that is where the mind goes, not to another object. So if intention isn't directed towards a particular object, the mind is not placed there. One's not thinking about it or engaging with it. So this is the function of this mental factor intention, which is mental karma. So as I mentioned, this is a presentation of karma into 2, that of karma that is intention. So that's what's been presented here. It is the mental factor the mental factor of intention that moves the mind towards an object. So it's clear, it's solely, and it's mental karma. Karma of body and speech is now here presented as karma that is intentional. So this is now we come to the next paragraph. So the order of the Tibetan and English is a little different. So we start here with the meaning of what is karma that is intention, that is intentional action, karma that is intentional action, the karma of body and speech that is motivated by that intention. So it's the physical and verbal activity that is motivated by the mental factor of intention. So the first one, karma that is intention, that first sentence, that refers to mental karma. What about physical and verbal karma? That is, as we see here, the karma of body and speech that is motivated by that intention. So karma, that is intentional action. And again, as the translator would say, remember, bear in mind this word karma is Sanskrit, English, action. So it's the same word. So sometimes action will be used. And what does it refer to? The physical and verbal conduct motivated by the mental factor of intention. So that was the meaning, the karma of body and speech that is motivated by that intention. So the Tibetan, and therefore not the English, nor the English, it doesn't give the term that is being discussed, but it's karma that is intentional action. What is karma that is intentional action? The karma of body and speech that is motivated by that intention. It is then divided into two. We see, so the sentence continues. So karma that is intentional action is divided into perceptible and the imperceptible, and posits them as only being form or having form. So the Vaibhashika, this is a Vaibhashika presentation. So they say that the physical and verbal action, or karma, that is motivated by that mental factor intention, this is form. Because, for example, one is saying words or doing physical activity. And that physical activity, or that speech, it has form. And therefore, this karma has form. So to give two illustrations, if you come into the presence of someone, the intention arises to greet the person. So that is the mental factor that propels one to say something, and you greet the person. The actual greeting is verbal action or verbal karma. So again, the verbal action or verbal karma is the greeting of the person motivated by that intention, the mental factor of intention. And then in terms of physical action with the body, if one wants to pay respect or express the mind of refuge, then the mental factor of intention motivates one to join one's palms together, perhaps in front of a Buddha image. So the joining of one's palms together is physical action. One's body is doing something. Physical action, physical karma, motivated by the mental factor of intention. So these are two illustrations of karma, that is of body, and karma of speech, motivated by the mental factor of intention. And so this is from the second type of karma that is intentional action. One is intentionally doing something. So therefore, what is presented here is that karma is not necessarily consciousness. Mental karma is consciousness, but karma accumulated by means of the mind is consciousness. Karma accumulated by means of the body or speech is form. So this is a view. It hasn't come yet in the Tibetan, but we see this is the beginning. First, the Vaibhashikas divide. So this is a Vaibhashika view, that they divide karma accumulated by the body and speech as having form, and only karma accumulated by the mind as being consciousness. So, for example, if one has a wish to harm someone, this is the mental factor of intention, and then if it is expressed verbally and one talks in an unkind manner, one has accumulated verbal, non-virtuous karma. If one has a mind of refuge arises, and one, with this mind of refuge, is now going to recite the refuge prayer, for example, then, motivated by this virtuous intention, the virtuous mental factor of intention, one engages in a recitation of a refuge prayer, then that is virtuous verbal karma. And when one is engaged in just conversation with someone with no particular virtuous or non-virtuous mind, then that is neutral karma. You're just asking someone, how are you, how's your day, where are you coming from? So without any particular virtuous or non-virtuous karma, virtuous or non-virtuous intention, then that is neutral karma. And then just to say as an aside, earlier when Genla was dividing karma, saying that karma can be presented in many different ways, I made a mistake in the translation. He said then virtuous, non-virtuous, and neutral. I said immovable, that comes later, but then he said neutral rather than immovable. And it's the same on the side of non-virtue. In terms of physical behavior, or behavior with the body, then this is the same in that with an intention to cause harm, if one then strikes them with one's hand, then that is motivated by a non-virtuous intention. One accumulates non-virtuous physical karma, or karma with the body, which is form. Or if in terms of virtue, then motivated by a virtuous mental factor, one the mind of refuge arises, and one then physically joins one's palms together, or maybe prostrates with one's body, then one is accumulating virtuous karma by means of one's body, and this has form. And if one is, say, just walking around with no motivated by not a virtuous intention or a non-virtuous intention, then the karma that is accumulated is neutral.
Oh yeah, understand.
So these, and this, we see here, let me read the whole thing. First, the Vibhashika. So this, first of Vibhashika, divide the karma, body and speech that is motivated by that intention into the perceptible and imperceptible. So this is, which are both form. So perceptible and imperceptible is something, presentation unique to the Vibhashikas. Perceptible form, or can be revelatory form and non-revelatory form. It's also translated like that. So perceptible form is what one can perceive through one's senses. For example, one can see it. And then non-perceptible form is form that, or imperceptible form, that is subtle form, that one cannot perceive by means of one's senses. So this presentation here is unique to the Vibhashikas, this saying that karma of body and speech has form, and that karma of body and speech can be divided into the two, perceptible and imperceptible. So this is a unique presentation of the Vibhashika. So being a unique view to the Vibhashika, it's clearly then not universally accepted. Lama Tsongkhapa continues, Master Vasubandhu refutes that and maintains that karma of body and speech is the intention, so that mental factor of intention, that operates together with the perceptible physical and verbal actions, whereby he explains both types of karma to be intention. In other words, a physical and verbal karma, or karma of body and speech, is also the mental factor of intention. So let's then look at the refutation by Vasubandhu, which is the generally accepted view. So Master Vasubandhu refutes that and maintains that karma of body and speech is the intention that operates together with the perceptible physical and verbal actions. So when, let's say, one has harsh thoughts towards someone, this is mental. So it is, there's a mental, the mental factor. So this is relating now to the first sentence above. So there's the mental factor of intention that draws its concomitant mind towards its object. So there's a non-virtuous intention, the mental factor of intention, is now thinking about something in a non-virtuous way. So non-virtuous mental karma is accumulated. Thus far, the two presentations, the Vibhashika and Vasubandhu's, are the same. Then, under the influence of that intention, then the person acts. So let's say they say something or they do something. Now they are, let's say, they're raising their hand and they're bringing their hand down and they enacting some violence towards this person. This is being done by, you could say it's a continuum of that same motivation, but there is now, you can say, a different motivation that's present in the actual physical activity, because it's now no longer I dislike this person or I'm wanting to hit them. It is now I am hitting them. So the mental factor of intention that is accompanying the actual physical act, this is the karma accumulated by means of the body, but it is the mental factor of intention. So the difference is that Vasubandhu is saying that the karma accumulated by the body is consciousness. It is the mental factor of intention. It's not saying that it is form. Just as the translator, that segment before, I didn't mention the two terms, karma that is intention, karma that is intentional action. Vasubandhu accepts both of these, but states that they are both consciousness. This is the difference. So I'll use the two terms now in this segment from what Ken has just said. So it's the same situation for virtuous karma. So let's say a mind of refuge has arisen. So there is a virtuous motivation. The intention, the mental factor of intention, has drawn one's mind towards thoughts of refuge. So one here is accumulating that first type, karma that is intention, and it is consciousness being the mental factor. Then when this is, say, expressed through either recitation or prostration, then that becomes the second type of karma, karma that is intentional action. But this karma that is intentional action, that is now being expressed through bringing the palms together, so physically, or verbally, the recitation of refuge verse, that karma that is intentional action is accompanied by the mental factor of intention, and therefore the karma that is intentional action, whilst it's accumulated by means of the body or speech, the karma itself remains the mental factor of intention, and therefore remains consciousness. So therefore, for Vasubandhu, he accepts both karma that is intention and karma that is intentional action. But whilst karma that is intentional action is accumulated by means of the body and speech, what that karma actually is, when you point to it, it is consciousness, in particular, the mental factor of intention. I've just spoke about virtuous karma, previous to that non-virtuous karma, now the third, neutral karma. So if one has, let's say, the wish, I'm going to go somewhere, then, but it's just that wish. There's not a virtuous or non-virtuous intention. Then the karma that is accumulated, the karma that is intention, this mental karma, is neutral. Then you actually go there, but again, whilst you're now walking, you're going somewhere, your intention is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Then the karma that is intentional action, that's being accumulated by means of the body, is also neutral karma, because the accompanying intention, the mental factor of intention, is neutral. It's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Therefore, where the difference here comes is not in a karma that is intention, which is mental karma, and the mental factor of intention. That all the Buddhist tenets agree. The difference solely comes in karma that is intentional action. So karma accumulated by means of body and speech. There, the Vaibhashikas alone say that this karma has form. Whereas all other Buddhists, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and the two Madhyamakas, will say that karma that is intentional action, so karma accumulated by means of body and speech, is still consciousness, because the acts of body and speech are accompanied by the mental factor of intention, and that is the karma. The mental factor of intention is always present in that it's drawing the mind, this concomitant mind, towards whatever it is the mind is engaging with, which means that for us, we are always accumulating karma. That karma can be virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. Again, because our mind is always active, our mind is always drawn towards something. and therefore intention is always present, and therefore karma is always being accumulated. The karma isn't always necessarily virtuous or non-virtuous. It certainly can, and maybe often is, neutral. So we can conclude there for this morning. If you have questions, then please feel free to ask. Venerable Seppel?
I have two questions. With the mind, with the omnipresent manufacturing intention, it needs to be over a certain time to actually. Does it need to be over a number of moments to be a karma? Mm-hmm. One time.
Yeah. So for the mental factor of intention to accumulate karma, does it need to be over a number of moments? So to have like a certain strength to it, as opposed to fleeting.
It has to be, you'd have to, I think there has to be ascertainment there, which means it can't be just, all moments of intention.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my doubt.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the intention itself? This mental factor intention itself is karma, and this mental factor is therefore always active, therefore always accumulating karma. And there are other mental factors in the group of object ascertaining that will perform the function of ascertaining the object. So intention itself doesn't ascertain the object. But what intention does is it moves the mind. It only moves the mind. That moving of the mind is the creation of karma, neutral, virtuous, or non-virtuous. So it's just that.
So intention is karma, but it's not necessarily karma that's accumulated. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm. The intention is karma, but it's not necessarily karma that is accumulated. So in brief, yes, because if someone does something unintentionally, then karma is not accumulated because, again, unintentionally, which would express it differently, there is no intention, which means there is no karma. So therefore, if intention is present, then karma is accumulated, virtuous, non-virtuous, neutral. And if intention is absent, then karma is not accumulated. Okay. So, because this, maybe I'll just say it, Venerable Seppel is referencing another fourfold division, and I'll just read it. Karma which you have done but not accumulated, karma which you have not done but accumulated, karma that you've done and accumulated, and karma which you have neither done and nor accumulated. So it comes down just to this. If intention is there, then the karma is accumulated. If intention is absent, you're walking or you're driving and you kill an insect, there's no intention involved. Therefore, with intention being karma, no karma is accumulated. You've done something, but because you're walking or you're driving and something died, you've done something, but no karma was accumulated. So a long way to say yes. Cameron?
We talk about karma arising from intention. This is to do with the definition of free will. Is this intention simply free will? And if that's so, is it that we can't generate karma without free will?
So I'd rather leave the consequence, because again I would need to agree first. So is intention free will, or do we have free will around intention?
Is intention associated with free
Okay.
will? It's to do with the definition of free will.
Yeah. So and then to express it with other words with same meaning, is there intention that is not dependent on anything? Because that would be free will. So an intention that is not dependent, because that would be free will. Different words, but that is the meaning of free will.
Free will.
Yeah.
The definition of free will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what this is saying is that part and parcel of a particular definition of free will. Intention.
Okay. Let me just ask the question, rather than go on to consequence. So the way this term free will is used in society is quite rough, quite coarse. The Buddhist understanding is subtler than that. So perhaps you can say the way it's used in society is whether you have the choice to do something or you're compelled against your choice to do something. So this is the way that the term it seems to be used in society. The meaning of in Buddhism is much subtler than that, in that it's whether you are able to, whether something comes about not independent on anything at all, independent of anything at all. So we'd normally talk about causes. So to answer your question here, does an intention come about independent on causes or not? This is the discussion about free will in Buddhism. And of course, it comes about independence on causes. So this is the way the word is used in Buddhism is deeper than just whether one has the choice or not and whether one is compelled to do something or not.
Okay.
And then there's someone else.
There's a question similar to Cameron's where intention seems to imply that you have an aim, and I'm just wondering where it comes in with being compelled by predispositions. Like I've heard the term mental urge. Is that included in intention?
So the term intention, the intention to do something, it implies that you have an aim or there's a purpose behind what you're intending to do. And does this also, I've heard something about there being a habituation to doing something.
More like being driven by your predisposition.
So the discussion took a while because the word for goal is also the word for observed object. And so every intention has an object, so therefore everything has a goal. But anyway, we got there in the end. So one has an intention with and without a goal. Because everything our mind engages with, so every thought we have, there is intention there. One's not necessarily acting with a goal in mind. So if one is acting with a goal in mind, one's intention is probably going to be stronger because there's purpose behind what one is doing. So the word for goal is also the word for purpose. So maybe that makes it quite clear that with a purpose in mind, your intention is going to be stronger, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. And then in terms of habituation or being urged, compelled to do something. So if one is habituated to a particular way of thinking, then one is going to much more readily be drawn to have such an intention. So if one has a strong habituation to a particular virtuous way of thinking or afflicted way of thinking, that the intention is going to move in that direction much more easily. So and therefore habituations are developed as well.
Okay, thanks. And the other one was your example of killing insects on the road unintentionally. Don't you accumulate karma if you commit manslaughter?
Yeah, so manslaughter then would be where you kill, but with a reason that could be considered justified, something like that?
No, I mean like if you drive, like you run someone over accidentally, don't you accumulate karma?
Okay. So I'll put it like that rather than with a legal term. So if you're involved in an accident and someone dies, you have no intention to kill them, but do you accumulate karma? Okay. So if you are involved in a car accident and a passenger in your car or the other car or pedestrian dies, you had no intention to bring harm to another person. But karma has been done, but not accumulated. Karma which you have done, but not accumulated. Jela masakbele. Karma which you have done because you're doing something, but no karma was accumulated because of the lack of intention. So this is unintentional, a lack of intention. And with a lack of intention, then it's not a complete karmic action.
I just manage.
In regard to afflictions, and having taken hold within our continuum, is that because we're in this realm of attachment, or has attachment propelled us into this realm because of karma in another realm?
See if I got it all. Are we propelled into this realm because of attachment that we had?
Or desire or anger?
And therefore we have a strong habituation to attachment. Is it like that? Maybe just repeat?
True origins, they arisen in this realm, or are we in this realm because of those afflictions?
Okay. So do these afflictions arise within this realm, or do they arise because we are in this realm?
Yes. Like there are pure realms, formless realms, form realms.
And are we in this realm because of our afflictions accumulated in a previous life? Yeah? Okay. The reason that we experience the afflictions of the desire realm is because we have the imprints for those afflictions. And those imprints could have been accumulated in this life, but certainly have been accumulated in past lives. So having those imprints, so that's one reason. And the second is because we keep encountering objects of the desire realm. So having the observed object before us, as well as the imprints for the afflictions, these two come together and the afflictions readily ripen. So again, to this part of your question, the reason why the afflictions rise so easily within us is because of the strength of the number of imprints of the afflictions we have. So they ripen, because they're many, they ripen very easily. But being in the desire realm doesn't mean that one has to experience those afflictions. They can, as I think last weekend looked at, they can be suppressed by developing the concentrations of the form realm or the absorptions of the formless realm. In this way, one can suppress the afflictions of the desire realm. Those imprints remain, but when one encounters the objects of the desire realm, because the imprints have been suppressed, they do not ripen. So that certainly is possible. But yeah, again, the reason we experience them so easily is because we are in the desire realm, so we have these objects around us, and because we have the imprints on our continuum. So we can conclude there for this afternoon. We'll meet again at 2:30. Between now and then, what I'd like you to think about is the brief discussion we had with Cameron, as well as what has that led to that discussion in previous classes about whether there is free will or not, and what is the meaning of free will. So, as I've said, the meaning of free will in Buddhism is that if there is freedom, free will, it means something is independent. So it can come about without or free of any dependency, for example, without causes. So this is the meaning of free will in Buddhism. In society, as I mentioned, it's got a coarser meaning. So maybe give it some thought as to the meaning of free will from the Buddhist perspective, and see whether this makes sense to you or not. But we'll talk about it more this afternoon. Thank you.